All right. Hello, folks. We are super excited that you're here with us today. We are going to be talking about how to support your students' mental health and really kind of giving you an overview of our Counseling and Psychological Health Center, or the Center for Counseling and Psychological Health. And so we're super excited that you're here today. We have this series called Family U Chats, which is really our opportunity to make sure that we educate families on how to best support their students. And so we're super excited that you're joining us. Just so you know, we record all of our webinars. And so after we finish up today, this will be available on our YouTube and on our Facebook page, as well as our website. And so you can always go back and watch these recordings, and they will be available to you. Or if you want to share them with your students, you're also welcome to do this. But really, this is going to be focused towards families. And so, again, super excited to have Jennifer LaForte here today. And so I'm going to have her introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself, and then jump right into her presentation. But thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jonathan, and welcome everybody to this family chat. As Jonathan said, my name is Jen LaForte. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work at the Counseling Center at UMass. I've been working here for about 14 years and provide a range of services. So I'm here today to present an overview of our services from the Counseling Center and speak a little bit more specifically about how families and concerned parties or friends can support students while they're here at UMass as mental health concerns come along. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and there we go. Jonathan, would you tell me when I'm sharing, when you can see it? Looks good. Okay, great. So I've introduced the name of our center, or actually Jonathan did. We are called the Center for Counseling and Psychological Health, which is a longer title. It is meant to refer to both our support for people in an ongoing way in therapy, but also for our broader support of the community and their mental well-being. And so in addition to therapy and crisis services, which I'll talk about a little bit later, we do a lot of community work, outreach work, prevention work, so that students are learning how to and being encouraged to use mental health well-being behaviors and strategies before bigger problems arise. But nonetheless, the name is long, and so we're known more widely across campus as CCPH, and you'll hear me referring to us as such today. So, like I said, I'll be introducing our services and also a little bit about who we are as a staff. So our mission is to foster psychological development. And so this is part of what I was referring to earlier. We certainly do mental health consultation and short-term treatment, but we also really work to promote well-being from the beginning. So we have a lot of our services geared towards that more upriver tertiary prevention. And we work with many on-campus partners, certainly Jonathan's office with the Dean of Students. We work closely with UMPD, which is the police department, and the academic departments, as well as the international programming departments to support our students during their time with us. We are physically located in the Middlesex House, which is a building typically known to students. We're near the center of campus, near the Whitmore Administration Building. And we also have a website, which is the #1 way that students tell us they learn about our resources. So we work hard to keep that up to date. We, as providers, come from a range of disciplines. So our therapy providers, our social workers, licensed mental health clinicians, and psychologists. We also have a full group of psychiatric providers. These are psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners. We have a full administrative staff and medical records department, and then we host 10 to 12 trainees every year who are typically at the end of their graduate school work and doing a year or two of supervised work under our supervision, and they come from many of these disciplines as well. And on any given year, we typically see between 13 and 15% of the student population in our offices for services and interact with many hundreds more in our outreach events across campus. We provide a range of services, as I mentioned earlier, and they're really intended to address a range of areas of difficulty or levels of acuity. So some of these are individual therapy or therapy groups. Others of them are workshops, and we also offer crisis services for times when people need immediate help, including after hours. I'm going to talk a little bit in more detail to provide an overview of each of these. And this is a place where it can be helpful for families and friends to be aware of the range of services, because these are some of the ways that students might find their way to our clinic or find an entry point. Then once in with us, we can help them fine tune which services might make most sense given what's going on. So we, like most of the university college counseling world, are utilizing a stepped care approach to treatment. Students can enter in a number of ways along this ladder that you see on the side of the screen. But once they enter, we're often working with them to determine, okay, what's going on and which service do we offer that best meets those needs. We're focusing on identifying what kind of support students need, and then also helping students get connected with that level of care. So whether that's making a referral right in our office, working with students to make phone calls to a program that might be a good fit, whether that's off campus or on campus. Part of our mission, like the full university staff, is to work with students and guide them through these intermediary years between, adolescence and young adulthood. And during this emerging adulthood stage, students need various levels of support. So some students have been facilitating their own appointments or their own treatment for a long time, and other students are less familiar with navigating systems like healthcare systems, mental health care systems, insurance. And so depending on what each student needs, we'll work with them to learn about those systems, to learn how to turn the insurance card over, see the phone numbers up at the back of the card, to get clarity about the kind of coverage that they have, and then how to connect with different kinds of providers and departments on campus. And then we help them with the transition to a higher or lower level of need. So what that looks like in practice is that once an appointment is made with the appropriate level of care, we'll often still schedule another follow-up appointment so that we can check in with the student, be sure it felt like a good fit, that they actually got there, navigated any obstacles. And so that when, the student is very clear that we remain an on-campus or a counseling center basis of support or foundation of support throughout their time at UMass. Because though we're a confidential entity and can't typically speak about what a student is experiencing unless they give us permission to, we do have these relationships, and we can help students think about, okay, well, how do I contact the Dean of Students office? What kind of support do I want to be asking for? How do I approach a professor and let them know that I'm having a difficult time and ask for, some support or accommodation? And so we can really help students with that throughout their time at the university. People often will enter our system through our Let's Talk program. This is a university-based program that is really commonly used across the country. Let's Talk is a 15-minute consultation with one of our providers, We hold those consultations both in person in the office and by telehealth. These appointments can be scheduled through our patient portal. So any hour of the day, the students have access to these appointments, and they can also be scheduled through our front desk during business hours. These 15-minute consultations are great because they give students a chance to share a little bit about what's happening and get some professional guidance about the kind of service or support or maybe department on campus in some cases that might be the best fit. It's also a very nice chance to sort of try out therapy without committing to a full hour-long intake session where you're just getting a sense of what does it feel like to sit across a mental health provider and talk a little bit about what's happening before committing into sort of delving in deeper and doing a little bit more work and receiving a little bit more support. So we see hundreds of Let's Talk appointments every year. It's a really highly utilized service. We offer these appointments every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And again, these are available both on Zoom and in person. Our second level of care, and one that is also very accessible to students, is our Stress GPS program. Our Stress GPS series is a number of workshops, or a series of workshops that provide psychoeducation and skills building for managing some of the anxiety, stress, and tension that are very familiar to college students who are navigating academic and extracurricular exams, and also very familiar to people experiencing mental health difficulties. So though the cause may be different for these problems, they feel oftentimes very much the same. And Stress GPS is intended to be a very accessible way of getting some knowledge and some skill building that can help alleviate a lot of these symptoms. And what we oftentimes find is that students can access the Stress GPS program and experience symptom relief from the things that they learn and practice. And they're able to stem more serious mental health difficulties from sort of steamrolling from there. Stress GPS is a workshop. We offer it Tuesdays through Fridays during both semesters. We have sessions that are available in person and other sessions that are available remotely. They can be registered for on the day of very easily by calling the front desk or going to our website. And for our in-person sessions, students can actually just drop by the office and attend, no registration needed. And this is a series, a 3-session series that builds upon each other, but that also can be entered into at any time. So somebody could start in week 2, then go to week 3, and then week 1. So again, very accessible and a really nice way to try out mental health services. And you're getting a little bit more time. These are hour-long sessions. So if you attend all 3, that's 3 hours of skill building, knowledge, and very minimal personal sharing. So a lot of students end up feeling very comfortable in this program. Oops. Next up, we have our workshops and drop-in spaces. These tend to be skills related more than personal sharing or therapeutic experience based on somebody's own, personal experience. The summer drop-in spaces where you can just drop by and come as often or as little as you might like. These include services like pet therapy, which has quickly become one of our most popular services. We currently have 3 pet therapy dogs who provide, along with their therapeutic provider, they have spaces both in our clinic and around campus. We have some identity-based drop-in spaces, and you can see a full list of these on our campus, on our website. We also have a number of workshops. These are typically sign up, and you know that you're signing up for a 2 or 3 or 4-session workshop. And these address a range of difficulty students might be having. So some examples, we've had workshops in the past and typically offer workshops on social anxiety or managing focus in one's schoolwork and in one's personal relationships. And so we have a whole list of these on our website as well. We update that list each semester, and these are groups or workshops rather. They're sort of group spaces that people can enter for a shorter duration of time. And all of these services are totally free. Our next step in the step care ladder would be our therapy groups. So these are more traditional process therapy groups. There is some more personal sharing and interpersonal interaction, all guided by one or two therapeutic providers. Some of them are broadly themed. For example, we have an undergraduate support group, a graduate student support group, and then others are more specific to presenting concerns, a chronic illness group, for example, a depression group, or identities. And so those are also listed on our website. These are one of our services that we do bill insurance for, and all of that happens right through the clinic, and we talk with students about that. So this is just a sample, and I've hit on a few of these of the workshops and groups, and the kinds of themes that you might see. But you can see an identity group like the International Student Support Group, which we might offer both on site at the Counseling Center and at the newly named Global Affairs office right there, because many international students are very familiar with that office. College Living on the Spectrum, Understanding Trauma, and a grief and loss group that runs each semester as well. Trans and gender nonconforming as well. Then we have our individual therapy offerings. So, students can access these appointments after meeting with one of our staff people, either in a Let's Talk appointment or a first appointment, which is a 1 hour consultation appointment. So it gives a little bit more time for a student to speak with a provider and get some recommendations about next steps for mental health care. We utilize a short or brief and intermittent treatment model. That means that students typically meet with us for 4 to 8 sessions. Those sessions may be over the course of a short period of weeks, or it might be over the spread more less frequently over the course of a semester, so meeting every 2 or 3 weeks. We have no hard session limits. It's really the treatment planning is done specifically related to the student care and the student's needs. And first appointments, like Let's Talk appointments, which are also consultation appointments, can be scheduled through the patient portal, which all students have access to, or through our main phone number during office hours, Monday through Friday. All students pay as part of their tuition for 4 of these individual treatment sessions each academic year. And so those first 4 sessions are covered under the tuition, and then we bill insurance and work with the student and their insurance provider beyond that. We also are very connected and have a very long list of community providers who provide weekly or even twice weekly care at a frequency that's a little bit beyond what we're able to provide here on campus. And so when students come in and know that they're looking for weekly therapy or have been in really routine or weekly therapy in the past, we can work with them to get connected to a community provider. We do have a referral coordinator on staff to help with that. And like I said, we remain available to students even after even if they do move to a community provider, because it can be just very helpful to have a campus resource. We also offer psychiatry and assessment services. So we have a psychiatric care team here on campus who are housed at CCPH. Right now, students are referred for the psychiatric care by their therapist. So we don't there's a requirement that students be involved in therapy and things like that. We don't take external referrals for students for psychiatry. We also work pretty closely with the health services department, who provides some of the psychiatric services to students when that makes sense. For those students who have psychiatric providers at home, for the most part, we encourage students to continue to see those providers and maintain those relationships, because psychiatry is one of those services that's limited nationally. And so if you've got a connection, it's good to keep that. But oftentimes people will transfer their prescriptions to be filled at the health services pharmacy. So that at least they can access, new prescriptions while they're here. And then finally, CCPH does offer a limited number of psychological assessments during the year. These largely are our number one referrals for ADHD assessment. And that is oftentimes needed for students who want to access disability services for accommodation support. And then the university does require a diagnosis through a full assessment before an on-campus prescriber can prescribe a stimulant medication. So that's a very small portion of what we do. And then finally, we have our crisis services. So our staff all participate in a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day a week, every day of the year on-call support. So anytime students can call our main number, you see it listed here, and can be connected to our on-call team and speak directly to a licensed clinician about what's going on. This is a really useful resource for students who are in distress, either during business hours or after business hours. Our clinicians can be helpful in leading students through interventions in the moment that oftentimes can be helpful in calming the distress. These clinicians can also do a risk assessment and safety planning and refer to another level of care when that makes sense. So every student that I meet with, I ask them to program our CCPH phone number into their phone so that they have this number. And this main number is where you schedule routine appointments, and it's also where you can access our crisis services, so that they have this number right in their phone should anything come up. And I think that's a great thing that parents and families can do, is encourage people to program this number in there. One thing to keep in mind is we're not emergency services, so we're not a response team like the fire department or a police department. And so if the emergency is life-threatening, we always want students to call 911 in those cases, so the closest local authority can respond. We have some free online resources. More and more students want to start the work or do the work online, after getting homework done or in the middle of the night. So we also contract with a number of online resources. The first one, TogetherAll, is a support forum. So it's an online forum where students can access other UMass students in a moderated setting, and talk about what's going on, talk about difficulties, a little bit outside of the traditional sort of Facebook or social media kind of sites. WellTrack Boost, the icon that you see in the middle there, are online therapy modules. This is where students are often engaging in skill building and tracking of habits and mood and things like that in an online self-guided therapy program online. And then the third item that you see there is searching for a therapist. So there's a couple of good websites for searching for community providers that we talk with students about, but this is one that we contract with for local therapy providers off campus. All right, so I will stop sharing my screen, and then would love to open it up and answer any questions.
Well, thank you for that short presentation, kind of covering what's available to folks, families. What you can do is you can use the Q&A feature to submit your question, and then I will read those out, and we will answer those as we receive them. So please use that Q&A feature. The first question is, what is the privacy policy for students who are 18 years and older? Is there some kind of advanced directive, like a healthcare proxy, or anything else that you all need?
Great question. So we are guided by federal guidelines in terms of privacy policy. I'll start with 18 and over, and then I'll talk about minors as well. And what that means for 18 and over is that we follow the HIPAA guidelines, which means that we cannot, we're a confidential entity and we don't share information except in limited incidences. So that the exceptions to our confidentiality are if an individual gives us reason to be concerned that they are at imminent risk of harming themselves or somebody else, or they tell us that a protected group, child, elderly person, or disabled person is currently being abused. In all of those cases, we're required to break confidentiality, and endeavor to get the person's support or the other party's support. We share that with the student at the outset of treatment, and whenever we can, if we have to break confidentiality in one of those ways, we tell students about that ahead of time. I mean, there's sometimes instances where they're not with us or we can't get in touch with them, but for the most part, we try to be very upfront about that. If you have a student who you know will be accessing mental health care and you've been very involved in the past, or you have a student who finds themselves in great distress or even crisis while on campus, it can be a really good idea to encourage your student to sign a release of information for our providers to be able to communicate either with the parent, family, or guardian, with external provider, maybe from home or a childhood provider, but those releases of information are what allow us to communicate about what's going on. And those are available through our patient portal as well as our CCPH website. From the website, they can be printed out and then dropped off. From the portal, it goes right into their chart. And so when we have a student in our office who is in distress or that we're very concerned about, we're very actively encouraging them to sign a release of information. The other thing that comes up not infrequently is that there are some students, particularly in the first year, who are still minors or age 17 or younger when they start campus. In those cases, we need a minor consent form signed prior to being able to engage in routine services. And crisis services will always be of service, as needed because of the emergency guidelines.
Okay. All right. So our next question is, how often is Stress GPS offered per year?
It's a great question. I do not know the number off the top of my head, but it's 4 days a week, every day of both semesters. So it typically starts the first week of the semester and then it runs 4 days a week throughout, and then it will pick up again this year in that week. I think the first day of classes is Thursday, the 30th or 31st, and it'll pick up again that week and continue through the semester.
Yeah, that's a lot of times. Four times a
It's a
week
lot of times.
for 16 weeks is about 64 is a rough estimate, but
Thank you, Jonathan.
so our next question says, if a student might be on the spectrum, but never formally diagnosed, how do you recommend starting with services?
That's a great question. I think for both, one of the important things to think about is there's lots of ways to access diagnosis. And one of those ways is through psychological assessment. And that's a program that I have overseen for the last several years. And what I'm often talking with students about is what is the outcome of a formal diagnosis, because it is a lengthy and expensive process, not often covered by insurance. And so for both autism spectrum and also learning disabilities, a question to be diagnosed for the first time in college, a question is, what is the intended outcome or goal? And oftentimes, if it is self-knowledge and engagement with a therapeutic provider, that diagnosis can happen outside of a formal assessment process. So I'll just start with that. In terms of starting with services, we work with many students who have been diagnosed in various formats or ways with spectrum, autism spectrum disorders, and other difficulties. And so a lot of that diagnosis can happen in our office. We also have 1 to 2 workshops or drop-in groups each semester, including college living on the spectrum. And so those are really nice ways of connecting with other individuals who are experiencing similar things, similar obstacles, and that sort of learning and oftentimes relationship building amongst each other can be really nice to see. So I think a great starting point is one of our Let's Talk or first appointments. And another great starting point would be one of those drop-in groups.
All right. The next two questions are not super for you. They're kind of for me. So, as we'll be sending out this presentation for reference. And so, just so you all know, this will be on our posted on our website. So, umass.edu/parents, on our Facebook, which is UMass Parent and Families. And usually it's shared in the Family to Family Facebook group. And so, you'll have access to it in those ways. It's also on our YouTube where you can watch it there as well. So, the next question for you is for students who need an ADHD assessment, since the service is limited, does CCPH offer referrals within the local community?
Yes. We do offer referrals into the local community, and a lot of the local community providers are former trainees or intern and postdoctoral fellows who actually trained here at our center. So we feel really confident in referring to those places. So um, if those are full or somebody's about to go home for winter break, oftentimes we can also work with students to understand how to get connected with those services um, in their local community. And then the last one to know about is that the Psychological Services Center on campus, which is it's the graduate program clinic for the clinical psychology doctoral program of UMass. They have a testing department and they offer ADHD testing at a flat, much less expensive rate than is typically billed towards insurance. And so they often have a wait list, but sometimes that wait list clears up pretty quickly. And so that's always a good wait list to get on as well. The name again is Psychological Services Center at UMass.
Yeah, so the follow-up to that question is while they're waiting for an assessment, even if it's interior or exterior to the university, how can students get assistance while they're waiting for that diagnosis?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think in a few different ways. It's always a good idea to take a look at our offerings because very few of what we offer the counseling center requires a formal diagnosis. So, for example, we have an in focus group I mentioned earlier. You saw also on the earlier slide. And in the past, we've had an ADHD toolkit group. Both of those are really getting at focus and concentration development from different perspectives. One's totally skill building and one is a little bit about, okay, what's getting involved, looking maybe one layer deeper. And neither of those workshops and groups requires a formal diagnosis. So there's ways to start accessing treatment ahead of time. In terms of other kinds of services, whether that might be accommodations through disability services or trying medication, both of those things would happen outside of our office. So I can't speak very specifically, but I'll tell you what I have observed. I think it's never a bad idea to connect with disability services and complete the intake paperwork, but they're typically looking for that full assessment before a student begins to receive formal accommodations. But again, I would always ask. Our on-campus providers both at CCPH and health services, cannot provide stimulant medications without a formal assessment. Sometimes people have home providers, or many of the students are still seeing their pediatrician or transitioning to general practitioners. Sometimes those providers provide stimulant medication. Because of the college setting, the stimulant medication is pretty regulated.
All right. So our next question says, what are some ideas to encourage a student to take advantage of your services? Some students are always too busy to engage.
It's a great idea. So, it's oftentimes when people are very, very busy, which is almost, all of the students, that sometimes things sort of can snowball, and then they're accessing services at a time where maybe if they had come in and talked with somebody or attended a stress GPS a little bit earlier, they may have been able to manage the symptoms a little bit more quickly. So that's a message I try to share with students. And I think starting with a glance at our website. I mentioned earlier, every student I interact with, whether it's in my office or at an outreach event, I am encouraging them to put our phone number into their phone so they have that. And then I'm saying, go, check out our website. You might not find a fit right now, but at least you'll know what's there in case you want to give us a call in the future. Stop by our pet therapy and just take that experience of sort of being inside the building, realizing, some people are, sometimes there's some stigma out there, realizing it's a really normal sort of, hopefully warm medical kind of building. And that receiving mental health treatment is really sort of happening directly with people. I think looking at the website with students can be helpful. And also it requires sometimes some patience, within this emerging adulthood stage, we're really trying to support students developing their own knowledge and volition. And sometimes we have to be patient for that process to happen. And we see that too from our offices, where a student doesn't schedule a follow-up, or doesn't continue treatment. And so I try to use education and planting the seed, and hope that it's a way of them knowing they have the support, even if it's later on. Oops.
So the next question says, should the student seek counseling? Does the university reach out to parents or guardians immediately?
That's a good question. The university doesn't. So, because of the HIPAA guidelines, as long as if somebody is 18 or over, a parent or guardian would not be contacted about being in treatment, with the rare exceptions that I mentioned earlier. So, and oftentimes those exceptions are actually used to access emergency support services for students.
So our next question says, what if my student already has a therapist but still wants to talk to someone on campus?
I think it's a really good idea to do it. So we don't duplicate therapy services. That's sort of a standard in the field. But it is never a bad idea to have a resource on campus. So I was just talking with somebody yesterday. The person's working with a therapist in the community, and so we met for a second time just to sort of underline that point. It sort of didn't come up until the end of the session, but I also wanted to be sure the person was leaving our interactions knowing that I could continue to be a resource. And so, I couldn't meet with them or about topics like therapy topics, but that I could be available as needed. They had questions. If they received a diagnosis externally and wanted help understanding how to register for services at Disability Services, or how to connect with Dean of Students' office if they were having difficulty in classes. So it's really important to us that we be a resource to students, even if they have their own treatment.
The next question says, do you know when the ADHD toolkit will be offered again?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand when it will be offered again. The provider who was offering it isn't working on our staff anymore, and so everybody sort of has their own groups that they tend to offer. And so I don't know when that specific toolkit is going to be offered again. But I think in the meantime, that online, well, first of all, coming to some of the other resources and focus, but also that online module has some nice focus and concentration and skills building on that. I think it was the last slide.
So there's the next question is our student has PTSD and has a therapist that he sees once a month in person. How could CCPH services be beneficial to them? They currently have some issues with assignments and stress, and so just looking for what additional support.
So there's a couple of workshops that come to mind specifically to the PTSD question. One of those is our Understanding Trauma workshop. It runs pretty regularly every semester, sometimes twice in a semester. And it is a combination of psychoeducation and beginning skills building. And that seems to me to be a group that might be a nice complement to more individual therapy, specifically targeting PTSD. Another group that is attended oftentimes by people struggling with PTSD is the Healthy Boundaries group, which is sort of it's a subset of what's offered in the broader Understanding Trauma group. But that Healthy Boundaries group, if boundaries and limit setting are an area of difficulty, that can sometimes be really helpful to students. In terms of late assignments and stress, the other, I think there's a few things to consider. Disability services might be able to support someone whose mental health difficulties impacting their ability to complete their work, and there's different ways they might do that. And faculty have a lot of say in terms of number of late assignments and things like that. But I think a conversation with disability services can always be helpful. And then the last thing that I would suggest as a possibility would be some of the workshops offered by the Learning Center, which I believe is run out of the library. Jonathan, you may know more about that. Feel free to jump in, but jump in.
Yeah, so there's the Academic Success Center, which is as part of the library services, and so there's free tutoring for students. There's also the Writing Center that students can go to that can help to review any written assignments that your student may be submitting. They also offer some academic coaching, and so we find that that's usually really helpful for our students who kind of need that executive functioning coaching. They have some student success coaches that are really able to do some more of that, less mental health, but more focused on helping them to really just be successful in other ways. And so those are some really good resources for our students. So the next question says, kind of as events happen on campus that may have a mass impact on our students, what does CCPH kind of do to aid our students in kind of getting back to whatever their normal was?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a great question and definitely timely. Probably any year and certainly in the last year or so. There's a couple of things I'll first say, when events happen on campus and there is immediate circle of people impacted, we are made aware of that immediate circle of people who are impacted. So let's say there's an incident in the residence hall, for example, we may be made aware of, roommates or close friends or things like that as identified typically by themselves, sometimes with the support of Res Life or the Dean of Students, so that we can kind of keep our eyes and ears out for them. And, without saying so externally, we'll know internally whether we're already connected with those students and endeavor to reach out, see if they want to come in for an earlier appointment, need any extra support, those kinds of things. And then if we aren't already meeting with those students, we're aware of who they are, so that if they do contact us for services, we can be sure to attend in a really immediate way to that group of impacted students. So that's one version in which this sometimes comes up. But the other way that it comes up is that when things are happening in the world, when things are happening in the country, when things are happening on the campus, they're impacting people in diffuse ways. And so those themes that are happening externally, we are seeing and are coming up in our group therapy sessions, in our individual therapy sessions, sometimes in the themes we're hearing about with crisis calls. And so I think that students um, will find a knowledgeable and receptive staff when that happens. We spend, we devote a great deal of time, several hours every month to developing our awareness of issues happening nationally and internationally and the way they're impacting people of different identities and cultures, and just working to be aware of these things and ready to work and support students when that happens. So I think that students will find a receptive and informed staff if they come in.
Great. Well, that was really the last question that was submitted. But my last question for our guests are always, what is one thing that you would hope parents and families would remember from our time together?
Great question. Oh, but it's hard for me to hold to one, Jonathan.
No one ever does.
Okay, good. So I think that the number one thing is I would like every student to have CCPH's number programmed into their phone and remember that it's there. So I talk about that all the time with students. Remember, you have our number in your phone. I think that that's a really big one. Number two, our website is not just sort of a bunch of information. Our website is detailed and updated on a daily basis if we have something to update. So it is a really working document and can be a great resource to students. And then I think that the last thing is that I hope you take away and that I hope students come to understand is this huge range of access points. Whether you want to get on our website at well, hopefully you're sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night, and your UMass ID will get you into those online resources that I talked about, and set up an account and check out the forum. Right? Or if it is 2 a.m. and you can't sleep, check out who else can't sleep and what kind of support can you get. Check out one of those skill modules, or think about browsing our website and thinking about which resource or which treatment might be a good support. We're available for mental health treatment, for crisis intervention, but a huge part of what we do is teaching students how to center the importance of their well-being well before they need our mental health treatment or crisis intervention, so that they can intervene as difficulties come up and learn to live a healthy lifestyle and a lifestyle of well-being.
Yeah.
That was way more than one.
That's okay. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today, Jenny. I really appreciate
Yeah.
all the things that you shared. And parents and families, thank you so much for joining us today. What you can expect coming up is that we'll have a webinar. We're working on scheduling one about study abroad and one about the second year housing process. And so you can look forward to an email about that so that you can get all of the information you need. Thank you so much, and you'll be able to find these recordings on our website, on our YouTube, and our Facebook pretty soon. Thank you so much, and have a great day, everyone.